Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 2008. We're going to be taking a look at Bad Company and they're going to be playing through Can't Get Enough. So let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on. I'm just going to jump in here because Bad Company, what a massive band from the mid-70s and late 70s and just has so much success, but it's just quality musicianship and also having a frontman like this guy, Paul Rodgers, because you can have great singers and sometimes great singers aren't great showmen. And this is the thing that really does separate the great singers from the absolutely legendary singers, is that Paul can have an arena audience in the palm of his hand, but has also got that connection in his voice to the audience, and he's just got that vocal ability to be able to control all of the phrases, all of the little riffs that he throws in, all of those little trills, the classic R&B trills at the end of lines that just tie it in and really makes his voice so expressive. The other thing that he's got is that grit on the voice, but the thing about Paul's voice is that it doesn't sound forced. It's like the grit is almost a distortion that's added on to his taste. So he can sing clean if he wants to, but then he's got that technique to really lay into the sound if he wants to as well. And that gives him such a great dynamic range vocally. And just a quick note that on the original video that I'm watching here, and it'll be in the description below, it says 1988, whereas this might sound like 1988, but it is 2008, the performance that we're looking at. And listen to the tightness of the band overall as well, because this track has got such a great groove in there, the way that the rhythm just bounces along, and there's so much personality in the feel of the groove throughout the track. And that's why this kind of track is one that you'll see lots of cover bands playing and not necessarily nailing, because the subtlety of that groove is something that can get missed with bands playing it too straight, and then having a singer like Paul up front is going to be really tough as well, just to find anybody that can do that job vocally, let alone interact with an audience like Paul does as well. And when I say that it's tight, I'm not just talking about the rhythm section, which is Simon Kirk on drums and Lynn Sorensen here on bass. I'm talking about the whole band and the riffs, the rhythm work that's going on in the background. Listen to the dynamic changes on the guitars as well. When we're in the verses, a little bit of palm muting comes in just to make those riffs a little bit more choppy, but also just to set them down behind that vocal that Paul's supplying. And then when we get into the chorus, we start to lean in a little bit more dynamically vocally, but also on those guitars that palm mute comes off and we now get a fuller sound. And we've got this dream setup of having two guitars, bass, drums and a lead vocalist. And I know originally in the mid-70s Bad Company were a 4-piece, and in this live performance we have a 5-piece, and Howard is the extra guitar that's added in there. And just quickly about the guitars, because we've got Howard Leese here joining Mick up on stage, and he was formerly of the band Heart, so he knows his way around the fretboard, as we can tell from this performance. And it really does open up so many options by having two guitarists up on stage being able to play those dual lead guitars like we have in this very performance. So Howard, great rhythm playing, great lead playing, and really does complement Mick with his playing as well. And it's good that if you hear this in stereo, you can hear the changes in the mix between Howard's guitar on the left and Mick's on the right. So it's great to hear the chops that are going on in the rhythm work throughout the whole performance. You might have a great lead guitarist in your band, but that doesn't necessarily make him a great rhythm player. There are so many great rhythm players that have sat in the background in huge bands, and the reason that they're so tight and the reason that the lead over the top of the rhythm sounds so good is because of solid riff work and solid rhythm work in the background by the rhythm guitarist. And here we've got an example of great lead players, but also great rhythm players as well. So they've got so many options. Bad Company were just such an all-round band. They just had talent all over. The sales don't lie, because Bad Company, their first album in 1974 that was called Bad Company, went multi-platinum, I think 5 times over. So that's just an indication of how they hit the ground running. But just that level of ability that hit the studio on that first album just really did result in that instant connection with a huge audience. And just quickly on the albums, because they released their first album in 1974, they released another one in 1975, another one in 1976, another one in 77, and another one in 79. And the only one that didn't go platinum was Burning Sky in 1977. That still went gold though. So they were huge sellers with their albums. They were just so in demand. And this is actually something that might have led, and probably did lead, to the band splitting up because of the strain put on the band. But let's just check out the rest of this performance.
You know that you know that shall we do it again? Shall we? You know that you know that
And there it is. Just a crazy good performance, because let's put this in perspective. The albums that I was just mentioning and the debut album, we're talking 33 years after the album was released. This performance comes out, and you can't say that they've degenerated in any way from that original sound. And it's amazing considering that Paul is still singing these songs in the same way, with the same tone, with that raspy voice that he's got. You'd think that so many other bands where they've had singers who have been similar to Paul, obviously there's only one Paul Rodgers, but singers who are hitting high notes and really hitting them with a lot of force, a lot of power, and maybe forcing them. That could have been the problem, because then the vocals start to go over time. Whereas here, 33 years later, Paul absolutely still nailing it. And this is something that will fly under the radar, because at no point during this performance do you ever think of how old the band are? Because you're just listening to the music, you're hearing how tight they are, you're listening to the great lead guitars, you're listening to Paul's voice as well, and certainly on par, and probably better than a lot of bands nowadays. In their 20s, in their 30s, they still can't reach this level that these guys can in 2008. Just getting back to the late 1970s, because in 1979, they released the album Desolation Angels, and at this point, they were touring all the time, playing stadiums, and I think they were becoming disenchanted with the lifestyle and being on tour the whole time. So it also didn't help, unfortunately, that Peter Grant, who was their manager, lost interest, or at least lost the focus on the band in 1980, because he was the manager for Led Zeppelin as well, and that's unfortunately when John Bonham died in 1980, and that obviously hit Peter hard as well. So they took 3 years off from recording and got back in the studio in 1982. So following the release of Rough Diamonds in 1982, Bad Company disbanded, and it wasn't until 1986 that Atlantic Records wanted to get them back together again and get them in the studio, which you can't blame them for, because they were really successful in the 70s. But unfortunately, Paul was now involved with the supergroup The Firm, and it was just Mick and Simon that was still on board from the previous iteration of the band, and this is where they got Brian Howe as the lead vocalist. And having Brian on board meant that the sound changed a little bit more towards pop than the heavy rock sound and guitar driven sound that they had previously, and there was a lot of synth, a lot of keyboards, because that was the sound of the mid-80s, and I think the record label intentionally wanted that sound to happen to try and fall in line with the trend of the time. But it turns out it didn't go so well in terms of sales with that kind of sound, and then by 1990 and the late 80s, they then transitioned back to the original guitar-driven sound that Bad Company were known for, and 1990 is where Holy Water was released, and that went platinum. So it was definitely a wise choice to get back to those driving guitars. And then between 1994 and 1998 was where Robert Hart was the vocalist, and in 1998 is where Paul Rodgers came back into the mix and joined back up with Bad Company. And he also started performing with Queen in 2005, and this is where, performing with Queen, he'd throw in a few Bad Company tracks as well. In 2008, where this video comes from, it was billed as a one-off, just a standalone performance, and they were joined by Howard and also Lynn on bass. So in 2009 they started playing again, and in 2010 they then did a tour. So they got the bug, and then in 2011 is when Paul said that he wanted to work on some solo material. It just so happened that throughout the 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17 and 18, there's always been little bits of activity from Bad Company and live performances. And I know that the lineup has changed recently. Unfortunately, Mick Ralphs suffered a stroke in 2016, so the lineup is a little bit different now to this video that we're watching. But when you've got a frontman like Paul Rodgers who never says never, there's always a chance that Bad Company are going to be playing somewhere near you soon. But also the quality of the sound live, that is something that is never compromised with this band. And having Paul as a frontman, as a singer, he just seems timeless with that vocal, just totally unaffected by age. And the quality of the musicianship with Bad Company is always going to be right up there. It's always going to be A1 live, because that's what they're all about, just driving guitars and great live performances. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!